Well, I think we should start. So, firstly, good afternoon, if you're in Europe, or good evening or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to our webinar today on the topic of driving growth with strategic marketing insights, hosted by Nepa and RealityMine. I'm Chris Harvman, the Chief Executive of RealityMine, and I'm moderating today. We'll come on to today's agenda in a moment, but first I just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping points. Firstly, as we're recording the webinar, so you don't need to take any notes, we'll be sending you a link to the video recording that you can then distribute to colleagues or whomever as you see fit. And the attendees, you're all muted currently, but you'll be able to submit questions. So you should find a question functionality at the bottom of the screen. You could submit those at any time through the session, and then we're going to take a few questions as time allows later in the webinar. So just in terms of the introductions, I'd like to introduce our two presenters today, Kalle Backlund, who's Head of Marketing Mix Modeling at Nepa, and Kit Sanford, who's Head of Analytics at Nepa. Kalle has 10 years experience from analytics roles in research and product, and is an expert using advanced analytics to solve business challenges, focusing on marketing optimization, which I think will become clear when you hear him talk. Kit also has 10 years plus experience of consumer and shopper behavior using big data and market research at dunnhumby, WPP, and Nepa. And on the right, I'm here representing RealityMine. We're a behavioral data technology company, and we partner with many leading market research agencies globally, not least Nepa, of course, where we support a couple of their products, as Kit will outline. The questions we hope to answer, or Kit and Kalle are going to answer, when should you choose a marketing mix modeling study, and when should you choose a path to purchase study or role of search study? Why is it important to study upper funnel metrics in highly researched categories? And which solution should you choose depending upon which vertical you happen to be in? Okay, so just on to the agenda and timekeeping. So obviously we've done intros. We're going to talk, or Kit and Kalle are going to talk about path to purchase, role of search, and marketing mix modeling in turn. That should take about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end to take some questions. So please do submit those. Okay, and without further ado, Kit, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Chris. Can you hear me okay? Just to check first.
Yeah, you sound good.
Great, thanks. Firstly, before we delve into the different solutions that Chris flashed up there on the screen before, I just wanted to talk for a brief moment about Nepa and the solution areas that we work in. So firstly, we have solutions in customer experience, so really around our CX suite. We also work in innovation acceleration and helping launch new products and services. But the focus for today will be around marketing optimization and the strategic insight solutions that we have that can really help our clients in that area. And the focus of today, as Chris has already said, is which one to choose depending on the business needs that you have. So we're going to start by going through each of the different solutions and talking through really the methodology, how they work, and what we can deliver. And I'll start by talking about path to purchase, which is the solution that we have to help inform omnichannel growth insights. I'm going to dive right into the methodology and how we're collecting data, how we're using RealityMine data, talk a bit about what we deliver at the end of it. And then towards the end of the session, Kalle's going to wrap up and talk about the comparisons between the different solutions. So to dive right in terms of our omnichannel path to purchase solution, we really believe that you need omnichannel data sources for omnichannel analysis. And the way we set up our path to purchase studies is by firstly collecting passively metered data from our panelists, where we use RealityMine technology to understand really what's going on the digital side of things, and having the best data source that we possibly could to understand what our study participants are doing from an online perspective. We also have another data source where we've got the same panelists answering diaries, quantitative diaries, which helps us understand the motivations and attitudes of them throughout the study, but also helps us collect some offline data touch points. And we also have the ability to use triggered surveys. So based on behaviors or anything that they're doing throughout the study, we can dig into that in more detail when needed. So we've got these two different data sources that we then, once we are in field and running the study, and once we're out of field, we are building into literal paths. So we are looking at the journeys that our shoppers are going through up until the point that they either purchase a brand or don't purchase a brand, and building paths back to understand which different touch points they've been through in their path. So this will be covering the in-store purchase behavior, but also that pre-store purchase behavior, the research that they might be doing in the run up to that. So we've got this single source of data around our panelists around what they're doing just before they make a purchase and what they're doing in store when they make a purchase. And this is both online and offline. So what do we actually do with this data? Well, two core things really. The first of which is we essentially build a Rubik's Cube, a data cube of data of all of these different paths, where we can slice the data in many different ways, by channel, by retailer, persona, any sort of segmentation that might already exist within our client's business. We build into the study so that we can cut the data in many different ways and really interrogate it to understand what's going on in the category and inform insights to drive growth for our clients. What we can also do with the data is model the performance of each of these touch points at driving purchase. Because we have essentially thousands of different paths by the end of the study, which either lead up to a purchase or not a purchase, as I say, we can model the effectiveness of each of these touch points, taking into account each of the other touch points to really quantify the effectiveness of each of the different paid, owned and earned touch points that we're collecting throughout the study, both online and offline, at driving purchase online and offline. So moving on to role of search and how this is different in terms of what it's doing in being able to optimize research journeys. The first thing to say is we use a very similar data collection technique, still very much powered by RealityMine's passively metered data that we're collecting online, and also a diary study that is running concurrently throughout the study. The differentiator, however, is around what we're doing with not just the clickstream data that we're collecting, but also analysing the content of the page and understanding exactly what shoppers are being exposed to at different parts throughout their research journey. The key thing on here being when they're being exposed to different brands across their digital research journey. What I mean by this is we're constantly scanning the pages of our participants as they're browsing the web to understand where they're being exposed to brands that are of interest for us for that category. Looking where that might happen on Google, it might happen on review sites, it might happen on blogs, it might happen on retailers, and being able to understand where that brand exposure is happening, how strong that brand exposure is, and then being able to look at changes that are happening in their brand metrics. So are they becoming aware of a brand during the study? Are they starting to consider different brands during the study? Have they made up their mind about which brand they prefer? And we can take all of this digital data collected from RealityMine, bring it together with our diary data around the funnel metrics and the changes in the funnel metrics that we're seeing throughout the study, and analyze this to understand the power of these different digital touch points at driving the whole brand funnel. Just to bring this to life a bit more in terms of what we're really building from all this digital data that we're collecting. It's really around understanding research behavior. So it starts with search. It starts with search engines, so primarily Google, and understanding what shoppers are doing. Are they searching for branded search terms? And if so, when they're searching for that brand, are they just being exposed to are they just being exposed to the brand they search for in their search result? Or are they actually being exposed to other brands? So they search for brand X and they're exposed to brand Y and Z within their search results. We also look at when they're searching for more generic search terms, so anything category related, and they're being exposed to brands within their search results. So that's in search, and that refers to, as I say, Google, but it also might be a retail search journey. So they might be on Tesco or Walmart and searching for either branded search terms or category search terms. But we don't stop there. We also want to understand the power of brand exposures that are happening after they've been searching. So they search on Google and they go off to a blog or a review site, and they're exposed to brands there. How powerful is that within the search journey? So yes, we've got in search touch points, which refer to search engines and retailers, and also after search touch points, which could be blogs, review sites, or also brand websites. How powerful is the brand website within the research journey? What we're doing with all this data, this is an example of some of the outputs that we can, or some of the output that we can deliver. And this is just focusing on that touch point around when shoppers are searching for category search terms and they're being exposed to a brand, how powerful are each of these platforms at driving different parts of the brand funnel. So you can see in this example that Google's accounting for the majority of searches, which you might expect. But actually, it's really powerful at that upper funnel, level, but is having an effect throughout the funnel. When it comes to YouTube, we can see that when shoppers have started to do some exploration, YouTube for the shoppers that are using it, it's really powerful at starting to crystallize the consideration set and driving brand preference. And then when it comes to e-retailers, it's not having much of an effect at the top of the funnel, but is the highest converter when it comes to purchase conversion. This is just one example taken from one of our studies, but it really does vary. And of course, we look at other touch points as well as part of the role of search studies. Kala, I'll hand over to you now. If you want to take control, you can, or I can drive for you.
Thank you, Kit. Am I audible as well?
Yes.
Great. I'll try to take control. Thanks a lot, Kit, for that. So I'll be talking about marketing mix modeling, which the purpose of doing this exercise is to optimize your media spend in order to drive growth, obviously. I'm going to start a little bit more with the how. And then go into the why we're doing this and the outputs, because the data we're using here in marketing mix modeling, it differs drastically from the solutions that Kit has been talking about. So in marketing mix modeling, we build a model to recreate historical sales. So we use, as it says in the headline here, using all available and relevant factors. And I'll get back to what we mean by that. But the important thing here is that how the data distinguishes itself is that we're looking at aggregated time series data rather than consumer or respondent level research data. So on the right here, I have a 3-year period with a yellow line, which represents the actual sales that actually happened. And I have a black line, which says predicted by model, or actually differently put, recreated by model. So we're using a relevant number of factors to recreate the sales. And we do this obviously not to have the best possible fit in under to recreate the sales, because we already know what the sales were. That's the yellow line. But we do this in order to be able to decompose the sales into different contributing factors and attribute how much was due to each of those factors. So as I sort of click through here a little bit, we can divide these factors into different categories. The first one being what we call seasonality and calendar. So obviously seasonality shifts will explain a large part of the sales in many industries. And so will, for example, holidays, which may increase or decrease the sales according to industry. So for seasonality, an obvious example is ice cream, selling a lot more in the summer than in the winter. Then we also have as our next category external effects, where we, for example, have weather. Again, I'm turning to the example of ice cream. It'll sell much more if it's sunny outside in the summer than if it's raining. Another external effect is COVID, which is an important thing to take into account when you model the 3 most recent historical years of data of sales. It might also be things like regulatory changes or for that matter, competitor activities. But what sort of brings these factors together is that they are external effect in the sense that they're they're outside our control. We cannot influence them, but they do influence our sales. The next category is what we call internal effects. So you could also call them like marketing in a broader sense. So for example, if we put our goods on promotion sales, discounted sales, if we change our distribution, I mean, this could be, for example, if you're a retailer or a retailer of any sort, if you add more stores or take away stores, that's a change in distribution, which needs to be taken into account. Or for that matter, new product releases. It might be that you yourself have released a new product, which will drive sales and create a peak in the short term. All of these things are factors that we need to take into account to understand the total impact on sales. And then in most cases, they play the role to be sort of a means to an end. And the final goal is to understand the effect of media investments. So we typically divide these into different channels. In this example, I've written down TV, display, search, advertising, social media, print, and out of home. And each of these channels, we want to understand how much sales was driven by each of them, so that we can compare that to how much we paid to be seen in each of these channels, which will then give us the ROI. So the next slide. Just to sum up, we create a so-called econometric statistical model. We created using all these variables, but we do this primarily to understand the effect of the factors in column D, the media investments. So doing this, as the headline says here, I'm going to build this slide step by step, but it's a key thing to us that we need to take into account brand strength into our marketing mix models in order to capture the different dynamics in how media drives sales. So what we mean by this is that the most obvious way to look at things and how media investments and marketing investments drive your sales is to look at this direct effect. So a piece of communication being shown one week will drive sales that week or the next week to some extent, but it's a very direct effect. People see your advertising, they go and buy your goods straight away. But it's a very established truth that marketing works in slightly different ways as well, which we call, in this case, we call it a brand effect, or long-term in quotation marks. So it's a more slowly working effect, and which we quantify by having something that we can a proxy for the brand strength, which we use in a separate model where we understand how media drives brand strength, which we in turn link to sales to put a monetary value on this brand effect or long-term effect. So the proxy that we use for brand strength is typically a continuous survey-based brand tracking, which is either run by ourselves or our client's provider of this. So the point of doing this is to get a full view of your marketing ROI. So in this sort of conceptual picture, the ROI is built up from 2 different parts. So each, in this case, Swedish krona, in this example, spent on media will bring back 8 kronor in sales. 5 of which in yellow are the direct sales effect, and 3 of them in green are the it's the sales driven through this sort of brand effect or longer term effect. And this is a quite typical relationship between the two effects. So it's clear that if we miss out on one of them, if we just, for example, if we just look at the direct effects, which might, for example, which is the sort of most common way of doing this historically, way back, we would miss out on a lot of the total ROI, and we would also miss out on a lot of understanding how each media channel is strong in driving sales. So we really need to take those both into account in order to get the full picture. And what do we do with these insights? Well, on the left-hand side here, we have illustrated that using this technique, we can look at not only the total ROI, which in this case on the left-hand side is 2.9, so meaning that £1 spent in media investments will bring back 2.9 pounds in sales. So in this case, I've aggregated the two effects, the direct and the brand effect, the long and short term. So this is the sum of both of them. So it's a total ROI. But now we split this in a different way. We look at it by channel instead. So we can see in this made up example, we see that display is by far the most efficient media, followed by TV, social media, etc. And by the bottom, we see that online video and radio have smaller ROIs, and radio actually has an ROI of below 1. So how do we use this information? Well, on the right-hand side, you have a sort of conceptual picture of what we can do with this. We have the the horizontal x-axis with the media investments, here illustrated in £1 million. And on the y-axis, the vertical axis, we have the sales contribution brought on by these media investments, again in £1 million. So the vertical axis is the output of the model, if you will. And this gray box shows that in the current situation with the current total media budget and the current mix between channels, we're right now spending somewhere around 43 million. That's the X value. We're getting back somewhere around 90 million. That's our Y value. So this is describing the situation today. I mean, this is already an interesting piece of output, but using these pieces of information, we can optimize the mix, and we can without spending 1 penny more, we can shuffle things around so we get more sales back from our media investments. So the same 43 million now actually yield around more than 120 million because we've shifted them to the more efficient media channels. A different way of using this could be to say that actually I want to go even higher. I want to reach a certain sales goal, for example, 180 million. So I put the bar there, and the output from the model tells me how much I need to spend, in this case 50 million, but also of course at which media mix, how should it be distributed between the different channels. And lastly, another situation where one can find oneself as a marketer is with shrinking budgets. You're forced to spend less money. Well, in this case as well, this tool will be invaluable to understand how to shrink it. Where should we cut things first in order to minimize our losses? So that sums up the marketing mix modeling solution, what it is and what it does. So I will proceed to wrap up the 3 different solutions that me and Kit have talked about in the last 15 minutes. So first of all, this is going to be one slide with all of them on them, and I'm going to start with just trying to summarize. So the business insights is the third point for each of these that we have in here. I'm going to start with the path to purchase on the left, bottom left, which Kit started with. So the business insight we get from path to purchase study is really omni-channel shopper journey insights, which help you to grow your sales utilizing paid, owned, and earned touch points. So it's very sort of comprehensive in the channels and the touch points that we cover here. And this is really a result of the data collection method, combining the behavioral with the survey data that Kit explained. Now, in contrast, we're looking at the MMM on the top here. So the business insights and the purpose of doing this is to prioritize and plan your marketing spend across all paid channels, quantifying the short-term and longer-term effects. So we're focusing on paid channels here, but MMM is really the gold standard way of going about when wanting to understand the effect of your media spend and the return on investment, more importantly, on your media spend. And again, as I just came from saying, it's important to do this taking into account both the direct shorter term and the branding longer term effects. And then coming to the role of search is a much more sort of specific tool which aims at the search advertising strategy. So using, again, combining respondent level behavioral and survey data, we can use role of search to quantify the effectiveness of brand exposure when shoppers are searching your category and how this converts shopper through the brand funnel. So we have the sort of full brand funnel, but we're zooming in on one specific channel, which is search, and how effective it is to be seen there as a brand. Coming to the second point from the bottom, the industry. This is an important distinction as well. For MMM, we're able to look regardless of industry, really. This works across all brands, all industries, simply put. Whereas in path to purchase, this is really most aptly used within fast-moving consumer goods or consumer packaged goods due to the frequency of those categories and purchase frequency. And lastly, role of search, we find that one has the most sort of use of this in categories that are really high research, so where the consumers really make an effort to search for information. One example is electronics, another one is automotive. Then lastly, with the top point here for each of these, the data type, as I already said in the beginning of my piece here, the path to purchase and role of search, they use shopper level primary research data. We're combining behavioral and survey data. Whereas with MMM, we're not using any survey data. We're looking at aggregated time series data, how sales and media spend have shifted across typically the last 3 years. So that sums it up, and I think I'm going to hand it over back to Chris at this point.
Great, thank you, Kalle. Very interesting, and you guys have done a good job on time. So that was fantastic. What we're now going to do is start answering some of the questions. And just to remind you, you can still submit a question through the bottom area, and there's a chance we'll get to answer it. But if not, we'll definitely be following up directly with you. So either we'll catch up with you directly from the question you've submitted, or you can email Kit or Kalle or me as appropriate anyway, and we'll still get back to you. But anyway, dropping into the questions that we have. Okay, first one, I think is for Kalle. So it's very topical given everything going on with Omicron right now, Kalle. The question is, so you mentioned in your MMM studies trying to account for COVID as one of the variables or sets of variables. Can you just talk a bit more about that and how you've managed to do that?
Yeah, that's obviously a very pertinent and delicate thing that we need to take into account when we do models. So if we do a model right now, we typically cover all of 2019, 20, and 21. So half of that time will be post-COVID breakout. So there's a number of things here. We typically need to take into account the sort of shock that happened in March 2020. There's a peak, or there's a big drop in sales, depending on, again, what the industry is. I mean, if you're working in transport, there's a huge drop to 0 sales. If you're working in sort of pharmacies, we've done models on pharmacies. They saw sort of a peak, people buffered up with medicals, and then you see that peak followed by a trough right after. So that's one thing you need to take into account, sort of using typically what we call like dummy variables or something which is captured as like those few weeks. But even more delicate is to understand how the sort of waves evolvement of the pandemic has influenced sales going forward. And there we've used a number of different things. We have our own primary like tracker where we look at how people's perception, fear, safety, like how they feel about the pandemic. This is usually quite a good proxy for how keen they are at spending money on things. So this is something which we found quite useful. We also used completely like external data on hospital admissions or even ICU admissions, because this has been quite a good proxy of sort of the intensity that the pandemic has been sort of felt across these 18 months. So again, has proven to be quite useful to take that external effect into account. So it's really varies with industry and market even, because you need to be quite bespoke in this way you go about doing this, Chris.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, second question. And by the way, we're probably gonna have about 10 more minutes. We're gonna cover off a few questions here just to manage your time expectations, and then we'll wrap up. So second question is regarding role of search. And I think, Kit, this is probably one for you. So to clarify, can you or how do you measure the effect that search engine marketing has on brand strength?
Okay, yes. So for brand strength, I think if you're just wanting to quantify the strength of your brand, to phrase it another way, it might be more appropriate to actually run an MMM type study, because it's something where you can really quantify the value of your brand and the effectiveness of it on your media. I think when it comes to role of search and what we're doing from a brand perspective there, it's really about informing where you should be making sure that your brand is appearing along a research journey. So how much should I be investing on search on a search engine versus search on a retailer, versus making sure that I've got the right placement on YouTube, I've got the right placement in certain blogs and things like that. And we do that by using RealityMine's data to be able to understand and build these touch points and model that to the data that we're collecting within the surveys. So understanding from the start of a study what each shopper's brand awareness, consideration, preference, and purchase, awareness, consideration, preference is, and look at how that changes over the study. And we can see from the brand exposures that are happening across all of those different touch points, how important each of those different exposures is at driving those changes within the brand funnel. So that's how we're doing it. So for role of search, it's more about where should my brand be within the research journey. For MMM, it's really about how I quantify and value my brand, how that changes over time, and how it affects my media. I don't know if there's anything, Kalle, you want to add on that from an MMM perspective?
Sorry, I was on mute. I think you covered it quite well there. Thank you, Kit. Gave a lot of context.
Great. Okay, let's move on. A question just come through, which was a very insightful presentation. Thank you for that. So that's real-time feedback, guys. The question is, will you be sharing the slides along with the recording? So the answer was yes. Will be, well, the slides are in the recording, but I'm sure we can get you a PDF file or something of the slides. Now, a kind of content question. And I think there's two that I can maybe combine here. And I think, Kalle, this is back to MMM. So I think back to you. The question is, where do you mentioned sort of short-term effects, longer-term effects, brand effect, direct sales effect. So where does short-term effects stop and long-term effects sort of start? That's one question. And it's related to another question, which is, can you identify within the MMM which media in particular drive the long-term effects?
Yeah, great questions. So first of all, we often get this question, and I completely understand where it's coming from. Because I'm sitting here talking about short-term and long-term. It sounds like I can sort of make a clear distinction about how many days or weeks constitutes the limit between the two. But we actually prefer to talk about them more as two different dynamics: the direct effect and the brand effect, like through brand strength. So it's not the case that we have a sort of distinct limit where one ends and the other one starts in terms of number of days or weeks. But a good rule of thumb, and this is back to sort of how we see the time series evolving and how we spread out the media spend, a good rule of thumb is that the direct effects are typically measured in days to weeks, whereas the sort of direct and longer term effects are typically measured in weeks to months. So that's as specific as I can get when it comes to the time aspect there. However, now to the other question about can we establish which medias drive through short term and which drives through long term? The answer is definitely yes, and it's one of the more key outputs from a marketing mix model, I would say. partly back to what I said before, that if you only look at the direct effects, you might massively underestimate the effect of some of your channels, and vice versa, obviously, if you only focus on one of them. But you can also have this, like, for example, like the typical example will be that a broad reaching media such as TV, or for that matter could be online video or social media. I mean, the channel could be used differently, but a broad reaching media that aims at driving brand, that one we will be able to see exactly how much it drives through that dynamic, and also the other end of the spectrum, more sort of tactical driving, potentially communicating price discounts. We'll be able to see how much they're driving, and therefore you could also get an input not only on how to allocate your spend, but taking into account your communication strategy. How can you use each of these channels, and what type of messages should you be focusing on, learning from what you've done historically? So yeah, certainly you can do that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kalle. Okay, we'll take one final question then. And Kit, I think, to be fair, this one can be for you.
Okay.
The question says, so the role of search and path to purchase studies seem to be using similar data collection setups. And I guess you talked about, panelists and sort of single source panelist data. So the question is, why do I need to buy role of search if P2P also covers Google search within it?
Yeah, interesting point. I would say, firstly, in terms of the setup side of things, yes, very similar data collection setups. The key differentiator is really, well, firstly around the RealityMine data and actually what we're doing in terms of being able to analyze different exposures. But the core difference really is around what we're collecting within the diary, and actually being able to measure the full brand funnel within, when we're looking at a role of search study, so that we're able to model these research paths against the entire brand funnel. Within path to purchase, yes, search is a key touch point there, but you're not getting the depth of granularity around actually being able to understand, when you do have a highly researched category, how much are each of these different search touch points, these research touch points, having an effect on not just the final point of purchase, but actually those upper funnel metrics. So I think it really depends on the business challenge you have, the category you have, to decide which one's right for you. There might be some instances where path to purchase, is a great fit, where you just want to understand the paid, owned and earned touch points and really, those growth insights. But I think if you're just focusing on that, you're likely to be a high purchase frequency category. It might be something in foods and FMCG. For role of search, it's much more likely to be those highly researched categories. I think where there's some overlap might be in something like hair care, where you've got a lot of research behavior, but you've still got a good level of purchase data. So if you're really wanting to understand the full brand funnel, it's role of search. If you're just wanting to focus on that final point of purchase, it's path to purchase.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kit. So I think we'll wrap up there. We're out of time. So thank you, Kit and Kalle, for your presentations. And of course, thank you all to the attendees for attending today's webinar. As I said earlier, we'll be sending you a follow-up email with a link to the recording. But if you have any other questions we weren't able to answer, I'm sure there were many, please contact us as appropriate via email. So it just ends to say thank you on behalf of Nepa and RealityMine for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you very much.